Welcome to Buckeye Bass Bash, episode number 1 from the Ohio State University School of Music. I'm Barry Green.
And I'm Barry's co-host, Jason Heath.
If you are a high school or a junior high bass player, we would love to introduce you to the double bass world, not just from the new Temishev Family Music Building at The Ohio State University, but from our entire worldwide bass community.
Now, Barry, you've only been teaching at Ohio State for 3 years, and already we're looking at bass days, college bass symposium, bass camp, a talented group of students, and now these 30-minute bi-weekly journeys into bass clinics and the bass masters. It's incredible.
Thanks, Jason. It's been great having you participate at our bass camp and our recent International Bass Summit. The bass is alive at Ohio State. We have welcomed the many teachers from Ohio and beyond to our campus, including you, Andres Martin, Tracy Rowell, Owen Lee, Rachel Kalin, and Jeffrey Turner.
The great jazz legend Ray Brown sets the mood for our first clinic. Barry is going to take you through the G2 octave bass scale fingerings, and then Barry and John Clayton will show you pizzicato and slap pits.
Okay, now we're gonna all play pizzicato on G major. Basses, this is the fingering we're gonna use. 2 octaves. We'll start with second finger in first position, G, open A, B1, C, 2, open B, E natural, 1, F sharp, G open, A, and then B fourth finger, shift for C1, D is in position 4, shift on E, play F sharp with the fourth finger, and the last note G with the third finger you can play harmonic or press it. And then go back with your fourth finger, F sharp, E1, shift for D4, C1, B natural, fourth finger, first position, B, A, rest is in first position, F sharp, E, D, C, B, A, G. Now I'm going to introduce you to one of the world's greatest jazz bass players, John Clayton, who's going to show you how to play pizzicato with the right hand, the way the jazz players play.
First of all, we take the thumb, place it on the edge of the fingerboard, and rather than have it here, we slide to the bottom of the fingerboard. Our finger, our forefinger, our whole hand, all of our fingers are pointing toward the ground, toward the bridge, right? And just let them sort of relax there. Then we take our finger, let's start with our forefinger. We have our thumb here, our forefinger's pointing down toward the bridge, and we actually, let's start with a D string. We'll put our finger here, and we allow our finger to get a piece of the string, and then pull the string and let the next string stop our finger, like this. All right? So again, thumb on the edge, finger pointed down, touch the D string, kind of get a piece of it. So we're not like this, more like this. Get a piece of it, let the next string stop your finger. Let's keep going on the A string. Let the next string stop your finger. And of course here, there's no extra string. We just pull like that. We go over to the G string, we haven't done that yet. We go like this, touch the string. We'll just keep going. So let's get into some slapping. First thing you do is have your finger pointed down, right? Like we talked about earlier, finger pointed down, touch the string. Let's start on a G. And pull it away from you, and then slap the fingerboard after that. So it sounds like this. Okay, let's do it slower. Ready? And. That's slapping.
Let's turn the bass bash over to Jason Heath, who will introduce to you the composer, bassist, Serge Koussevitzky, and the legendary Gary Karr.
Who was Serge Koussevitzky? What impact did he have in the music world? And most importantly,
does he haunt us to this day?
What's going on? It's Jason Heath, and this is part of a new series I'm entitling Who Were These People? Or something like that. If you can think of a better name, leave it in the comments below. In this series, we're taking a deep dive into the people that shaped the double bass, and today, that's right, Serge Koussevitzky. Serge Koussevitzky was born in 1874, about 250 kilometers northwest of Moscow. He came from a family of professional musicians, and Serge started on the viola at age 6 before moving on to the cello. At age 14, he received a scholarship to the Musico-Dramatic Institute of the Moscow Philharmonic, where he began studying the bass in earnest. His main bass teacher was Josef Rambazek, who had studied at the Prague Conservatory with Josef Rabe in the 1860s. That Czech influence explains why Koussevitzky played German bow instead of the French bow, which is more common in Russia at the time. Koussevitzky began to attract attention as a bass soloist. For his first performance in St. Petersburg, one critic wrote that the concert was a seminar on double bass playing. People like to compare Koussevitzky's playing to other prominent bass players of the day, with Koussevitzky pretty much always coming out on top. In 1900, Franz Simondl, who taught at the Vienna Conservatory, played an arrangement of an oboe concerto by Handel. The reviews were not so hot. A few days later, Koussevitzky played a recital featuring the exact same Handel concerto, and there was much talk in Moscow music circles about Koussevitzky having shown up Simondl. Koussevitzky's playing was compared to the great violinists Ysaye and Kreisler, and many people commented on his wide range of tone colors, comparing his playing to famous singers and instrumentalists of the time, including Pablo Casals. In 1902, Koussevitzky traveled with other Russian soloists to play in Germany's famous Bayreuth Theater, which led to ever-increasing concert opportunities throughout Europe. Koussevitzky played only transcriptions when soloing with an orchestra, generally playing the Mozart Bassoon Concerto and Kol Nidre by Max Bruch. Koussevitzky also composed a few short pieces for bass and piano, and then there's his bass concerto. Seems like there's controversy surrounding every major bass concerto. Research indicates that while Koussevitzky wrote the actual music for this, his friend and colleague Reinhold Glier most likely did the orchestration. Regardless, Koussevitzky is reported to never have actually played the piece with orchestra, playing the bass and piano version exclusively. Think about that the next time you're struggling with balancing the bass part with the heavy orchestration for this piece. The specter of Bottesini loomed large in Europe at the time, and rather than embrace that composer's showboater pyrotechnical works, Koussevitzky went in a different direction, choosing works that focused on expressive musical lines and mature musical ideas. In 1905, Koussevitzky went to Berlin to study conducting, and he became friends with many Russian exiles, including Sergei Rachmaninoff. Koussevitzky's home actually became a meeting point for the artistic avant-garde of the time. Even while studying conducting, Koussevitzky kept up his solo bass career, and he even founded the Russian Music Publishing House in 1909, with the goal being independence of composers from publishers through cutting out the publishers, to promote economic independence for composers and thus serve the cause of a successful development of musical creativity. Sounds like we musicians have been struggling with these issues for a very long time. In 1909, Koussevitzky played a concert attended by Leo Tolstoy, who then invited Koussevitzky and the other musicians to his home, where, at Tolstoy's request, Koussevitzky played a recital for him. Not much is known about Koussevitzky's bass teaching career. He took over his former teacher's post as bass professor of the Moscow Philharmonic Society, and he held bass seminars throughout Europe. He also worked for many years on his own double bass method, though the draft was left in Moscow when Koussevitzky left in 1920, and no one knows if it still exists. Interestingly, we've got this one archival recording of Koussevitzky. It was recorded in 1929, well after his heyday as a bass soloist. And it certainly has some dated glissandi stylings and such, but it's kind of incredible to hear his tone and phrasing from almost 100 years ago. In 1917, Koussevitzky's conducting career was really taking off, with him being named music director of St. Petersburg's Imperial Theater. This time in history, of course, was quite chaotic in Russia and worldwide, and Koussevitzky left what had then become the Soviet Union in 1920, heading to Berlin, then Paris, and finally moving to the United States in 1924, where he would become the conductor of the Boston Symphony and remain in that post until 1949.
In 60, the second and the third bass a crescendo. And then we will begin here with the string quartet. We will have the right balance that we need. 55.
As you dig more and more into Koussevitzky's life, you realize what a huge impact he had on the entire course of musical history. I mean, he conducted premieres galore by composers like Prokofiev and Stravinsky. He even contracted Maurice Ravel to orchestrate Mussorgsky's Pictures in an Exhibition. Though we don't know much about Koussevitzky's bass teaching background, his influence as a conductor has been documented extensively. One of his students described Koussevitzky's influence like this: "A great teacher is one who can light a spark in you, the spark that sets you on fire with enthusiasm for music or whatever you happen to be studying. Someone who can light sparks in his students, sparks which their enthusiasm for music or whatever subject they are studying can nurture until they become flames." That student was none other than Leonard Bernstein. Leonard Bernstein gave a talk about Koussevitzky at one of his young people's concerts.
I want to begin with a teacher who is still one of the strongest influences in my life, even though he has already been dead for 12 years. I refer to Serge Koussevitzky. I'm not sure how many of you young people know that famous name, but you certainly ought to, because he was one of the greatest conductors of all time, and for 25 years led the magnificent Boston Symphony Orchestra to a position where it came to be known as the finest orchestra in the world.
Perhaps as a result of his connection with Koussevitzky, Leonard Bernstein elevated the bass to an even higher level, bringing to prominence the person who would take the mantle of world's greatest double bass soloist.
Gary Karr is only 20 years old. His instrument is a madly difficult and unusual one for solo playing, the double bass, believe it or not. Have you ever heard a double bass recital? I doubt it. I don't know when I've ever heard anything like it since the great conductor Koussevitsky, who was my teacher and who was famous all over the world as a double bass soloist before he became a conductor. I believe that young Mr. Carr is on his way to being another Koussevitsky.
Koussevitzky had passed away by the time Gary Karr played his New York City debut recital in 1962, but his widow, Olga Koussevitsky, was in the audience. Now, here's what you might not be expecting. According to Olga, during the concert, she saw the ghost of her late husband appear and embrace Gary Karr while he was playing. Olga interpreted this as a sign that Gary was meant to play that bass. And a few days later, she presented to Gary what was then thought to be an Amati bass and has now become known as the Karr Koussevitzky bass. And this is the bass that Gary played for decades. The Kusovitsky Ghost story surrounding this bass has persisted, and it's come up several times in interviews I've done over the years.
Psychics have seen Kusovitsky's ghost, and they all describe the same character. This long button-down coat with white gloves on. Gary kind of knows that he's there, but he's never seen this spirit. But he and Armin were playing up at Saranac, up at Tanglewood. They were doing a concert, and there's a big room there that has Kusovitsky's portrait at one end of the room next to the piano. And they were doing this concert with the Amati. Gary said he couldn't stop playing. It's like it was a rehearsal, but just didn't want to stop playing. There was something that compelled him to keep playing. Well, when they finally did take a break, Gary went to put the bass and just lean it on the chair, and it's almost like it fell onto the chair, but it didn't. It didn't drop. It was taken out of his hands, and Harmon saw it too and said, it was really weird because he saw it leave Gary's hands, but it didn't drop and fall onto the chair. It was taken out of his hands and placed on the chair.
In 2004, Gary donated this historic bass to the International Society of Bassists, and it has been loaned out to bass shops ever since for bassists to play recitals on. In 2006, Aaron Riley of the Guarneri House loaned me the bass for a recital in Chicago, which I've got some hilariously grainy camera footage of. I had no ghost encounters, though I did have a scary moment when I was caught in a massive rainstorm and had to hightail it home to get the case off before it soaked through. It was a really cool experience to play this bass. Heck, I even wrote an article about it for Bass World back in the day. It was also a little scary to look out in the audience and see most of the Chicago Symphony and lyric opera bass sections out there. Not really to see me, but to see that bass. One big takeaway was how small this bass is compared to my orchestra cannon. I could practically fit Koussevitzky's old bass inside of my bass. Another big takeaway for me was, unless I played really close to the bridge, the bass didn't really sound that good under my ear. Once I got up on that bridge, the bass came alive and it sent the sound out, and it got me thinking, Gary Karr has a reputation of playing a lot closer to the bridge than most players. So, was it the bass? Or was it Gary? Koussevitzky's influence lives on in so many different ways. He commissioned all those pieces. He had that impact on Leonard Bernstein, who then influenced so many people. His bass was gifted to Gary Karr, who then went on to have a huge solo career and influence so many more people. Koussevitzky's concerto and short pieces have been played worldwide countless times, and Koussevitzky and his legacy have really elevated the status of the bass, not only in the bass world, but in the music world in general.
And now we're going to meet Gary Karr. Gary, being Gary, is crazy Gary as well as a monster musician. Here he is in Japan giving us a taste of the entertainer.
This is one of the all-time great double bass clips.
Look at that smile. There's a lot of joy in music, and Gary is the master at bringing out that joy to everyone when he plays the bass.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in classical music are worried to show that side of themselves, to show that side of the music, that joy, that humor, and Gary just brings that out so eloquently. It's so genuine.
So now Gary is driving a different car, the classical car. That's the hat he's wearing now. And what a sound Gary makes. He has such a unique tone quality with such great projection. Just listen to that melodic energy.
Yeah, you hear a couple of notes and you know it's Gary Karr, and it's so cool with the Koussevitzky pieces in general because he's actually playing Koussevitzky's bass. So this is the bass on which these pieces were conceived. So Gary's unique voice is coming through with that instrument that these pieces were actually written for.
So now we have another side of Gary Karr, that serene, pristine harmonics from the double bass that sounds so beautiful in playing this amazing grace.
And you think you know how to play harmonics, and then you hear Gary play, and it's amazing just the passion and the emotion that comes through these simple notes. He just infuses it with his spirit.
Yes, it has a very calming energy. Just you hear that pure white sound, and you just breathe. So now you hear Gary playing in the lower register with this soulful sound. And my gosh, you start to hear that, and so many people, I hate to admit it, we cry. I mean, it's just, he brings so much emotion to it. The beauty, the strength of that vibrato. It's a wide vibrato. His sound has tremendous overtones playing closer to the bridge, but it's so unique and powerful and guttural.
And the phrase that Gary would always use to describe his sound is dark chocolate. And I think of that image so often when I hear his sound, that richness, that fullness, it just epitomizes what good bass tone is to me.
While many of us play the bass on stools, especially in orchestra rehearsals, when we play solos, it's a tradition to stand with the bass. And so here we see Andres Martin, the legendary virtuoso and composer bassist. Notice his position with the bass. It never is in one place. He's moving all over, and yet the bass is glued to his body and represents the energy coming from his soul.
Hello, I'm Michael Klinghoffer. The first thing I would like to demonstrate today is how not to hold a bass, because you actually don't need to hold a bass. It is just standing there. So why don't we learn how to do it? Well, first thing, I stand right behind the bass. My left foot is in a straight line with the end pin. My legs are about shoulder width apart. My arm is straight, and I get closer and closer to the bass until I can't go any further. And now I tilt the bass to the right, and then I get closer with my belly, and my belly stops it from moving out. So let me demonstrate this once again from a different angle. Here I am with my left foot in a straight line with the end pin. I move forward towards the bass till I can't move any further. I tilt it to the right, and my thigh stops it from moving in, and my belly stops it from moving out now. And we find our balance point. And that's it. The bass is just standing there. You know, it doesn't just happen. It takes work. It takes building mutual trust.
Bass players love to play together in duos and in larger ensembles, and this is Edgar Meyer playing with the legendary Christian McBride, two of the greatest bass players on the planet. We will continue with this whole concept of playing together in our next video.
We have 11 bass players from 8 different countries playing not the Flight of the Bumblebee, but the Flight of the Rumblebee. This is such a great collaborative project that we did for the 2020 Bass Summit. Here we go.
height of the Rumblebee. That was quite fun and quite a workout. And this is just a taste of what we will be doing for the next series of episodes, at least through the spring of 2021.
The deeper you get into the bass world, the more you realize there is to explore. We've only scratched the surface here with the people that we've discovered, so it's going to be an exciting series for sure, and it's just great to have you on this journey.
Please join us for our tour of the bass world and the bass artists, our bass clinics. Bring your basses. We're going to just have a lot of fun.